Hey Riders, Eric Lang with Ride Adventures here, and also with me is Andrew Murray, our lead training instructor. Today's video, we're going to talk through the Kawasaki Versys-X 300, talk about the pros and cons of this bike, help explain who it's for and who it's not for. And Andrew, I know you've spent some time on this bike recently.
Yeah, well, so this is a brand new addition to our rental fleet, and it's also a bike that'll be available for rental by our training customers. So I really did want to get a little bit of time on it, get a feel for it, understand, why. Personally, I think this is a great bike for our rental fleet. In that riding time, I spent a good amount of time on gravel, on a lot of sand. I spent some time on the highway, so I think I got a pretty good overall opinion of the bike.
Well, let's start with the specific pros we mentioned about this bike. One of the first things we mentioned is that it's a manageable size and weight for a lot of riders.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a 32-inch seat
just
height.
over 32.
Whether that's a person that's shorter of stature that wants to be on a bike that's closer to the ground, or for anyone that just is looking for the confidence that comes from a bike that's lower to the ground. This is a pretty low seat height. It's lower than our CB500X rentals. It's also lighter weight. It's under sub 400 pounds.
Sub 400, very nice.
So pretty easy to handle.
Yeah, for a twin cylinder bike under 400 pounds, it's a lot of bike.
Absolutely.
We also said, of course, there is that Kawasaki reliability. You gotta love the pros of any bike. In rental and touring operations and training, of course, we want that reliability just like individual bike owners do.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at this bike, I mean, it's unlikely that you're very far away from a Kawasaki dealer, for one thing.
Yeah.
And certainly the reliability of the Japanese bikes is hard to argue with.
And another pro we mentioned was that the comfort level is there over some other bikes that might be considered in this kind of category as well. There's some comfort factor here people might appreciate.
So even though I'm a larger guy, I'm about 6'1", and this is a low seat height bike, I still was relatively comfortable on the bike. I would probably opt for a taller seat. Someone over 6 feet probably would prefer a taller seat to stretch their legs out a little bit. But overall, the cockpit dimensions are nice, they're generous. Overall, a comfortable bike, yeah.
Yeah, to me, it looks like a bike that can be comfortable if you're doing smaller trail type situations, but it's also got a fairing package and windscreen that it's like that all-day comfort might be there if you're really doing some serious traveling.
Yeah.
So, any other pros you can think of?
From my riding experience on the bike, one of the things I came away with almost immediately riding in the sand here on our training range, and then also when I left and rode some of the local tracks, is the bike's very stable. And I think that's going to really translate to a feeling of confidence for a novice or new adventure rider. I was really surprised at just how easy it was to manage in the sand. Even though it has a 19-inch front wheel versus a lot of adventure bikes have a 21-inch, which, a 21-inch front wheel will lend itself to even more stability in the sand. But no, this bike was very easy to ride, very stable, and I think that's a function of a couple things about this bike. It has a longer wheelbase a longer trail and a longer wheelbase than most of the bikes in its class. And that longer wheelbase, longer trail translates to
Stability then.
Exactly, translates to more stability of the bike.
And although a 19-inch front wheel, and yes, we might prefer 21 for dirt and sand, 19 is the right size for this bike, by the way. This is not a 1,000+ cc larger bike. 19, right. 17 combination is perfect for this bike.
Yeah. Other pros, our rental bike here is set up with luggage racks, so you can snap on, panniers and plenty of space for luggage. It does have plenty of space for a passenger if you were so inclined, but really, as a 300cc bike, you still have all this room for luggage.
Well, those are some of the pros about the bike. Now for some of the cons, the things we don't like so much. What did you see?
Well, I think most riders that have got some experience on different bikes, probably the first thing they're going to notice is there's not a lot of power. Right. And in particular, the power that it does generate happens at a higher RPM. That means that you do have to sort of coax the power out of it a little bit when you're riding off-road. In some ways that can be an advantage. We'll talk about who this bike is for and not for later on. It's a little bit buzzy as you get into the higher speeds. So I mentioned that I had it on the highway. Once you get up to about 65 or 70, it's vibrating pretty good. It's a high RPM motor. I mean, it's redlined at 12,000 RPMs. Yeah.
Not typical for an adventure category bike.
Right.
I think Kawasaki borrowed this engine from the Ninja street bike. That's the same higher revving engine, but it's still, a rider could put a 1 tooth larger counter sprocket, go 1 tooth bigger in the front, kind of keep your revolutions.
Change the gearing a little bit.
Change gearing a little bit, keep your revs down a little bit lower, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, the other probably obvious con as an adventure bike is the suspension. That's a function of the low seat height, right? This bike was designed to be accessible for new and for shorter riders that want a low seat height. So something's got to give, and that's suspension travel. This bike has got a little bit under 6 inches of suspension travel. You know, a lot of adventure bikes right now are, you know, in the 8 to 10 inches of travel. That's a con in that the bike becomes more challenging to ride on, you know, more technical terrain. The ground clearance is lower. Again, that makes the bike easier to ride for a novice, but if it comes to going over, you know, any kind of obstructions or logs, you're going to have to use more skill and more finesse to make that happen.
Perhaps at a slower pace than other bikes with more ground clearance and
Sure,
more suspension
sure.
would be blasting over that stuff with.
Sure.
So still plenty capable,
Yeah.
but it is what it is when you have that much engine and that much bike packed into
Yeah.
one package. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, with some of the pros and cons that we've already covered on this bike in mind, who is this bike for?
Yeah, you know, I think it's a great bike for a beginner, novice rider, especially a novice rider that has aspirations to get into adventure riding. So, you know, as we talked about suspension travel and power, this bike is going to have certain limitations, but a great way to get started. I can totally imagine a new rider goes out and gets his endorsement for his motorcycle license. Now he's legal to ride. A bike like this, he can learn to ride on the road, get comfortable with the controls of the motorcycle, and then take a class like ours and start to learn how to ride, you know, off-road with it. And it might not take the person as far as a more powerful or more capable bike, but it's a great way to get started in that. It's very sort of accessible. The price is low, so you can get into it, you know, fairly easily. It doesn't have lots of electronics and ride modes to mess around with, so I think once again that's, you know, lends itself to a more novice rider that you know, really ought to be focusing on learning to ride safely, learning good habits, and less distracted by, you know, some of the electronics that are in ride modes that are on some of the more expensive bikes.
And adding to all that, I would emphasize that again, because of its size and stature, it's sub 400 pound curb weight, it's almost 32-inch seat height. It is the size of bike that a lot of people can handle. Always ask people which, if you ask which bike they should be on, it's probably the smaller of the two bikes, so to speak, because learning, it's like you just don't want the intimidation of a bike that's too large.
And Eric, for that reason, I think it's a great bike for our rental fleet.
Yeah.
This is now, you know, sort of a legitimate adventure style bike that we can offer to our training customers. The other option is something like an enduro or a dual sport bike, which is not really the same as some of these adventure bikes. So it's a great bike to have in our rental fleet. We can now offer something that's, you know, easy to manage, low seat height, and really rides like a real adventure bike.
Yeah, and along those lines, you know, don't think of just engine size as being what determines what a bike is like, right? There are other 300s that are vastly different bikes from this. A single cylinder 300 enduro bike, like you're saying, is a completely different thing than this is once you have to do that long highway section or carry luggage or a passenger or whatever. So this is a bike, if you want that kind of a category that isn't just about riding single track trails, this is a very capable bike. So having covered who this bike is probably for, who can we say it is not for?
Yeah, so I think probably the most obvious category of rider that wouldn't be well suited to this bike would be a person of large stature that already has a decent amount of experience on a motorcycle. I think someone like that might prefer a bike that has got more suspension, has more power. That would be probably the first or main category. Also, I think someone that is looking for an adventure bike that they can ride fairly fast on more technical terrain, this is not the bike for them.
Right, not a low-end, grunty, single-track type of a bike. Also, probably not a great long-term, high-speed highway bike either. It'll do it, but you're gonna be wound out pretty far at 70 miles an hour. So riders, I hope this review of the Kawasaki Versys-X 300 helps you decide whether it's the right bike for you, whether it's the right bike you would want to reserve for one of our training courses or for a trip or a rental or whatever. And so, Andrew, any parting thoughts?
Just would love to hear from anyone that owns an X300 or is thinking about getting one. Put your comments below. Other than that, I'm glad to see this bike in our rental fleet now.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Ride on. We'll see you soon.